history of ska is tied to anti-racism and anti-fascism. The two-tone ska bands delivered a powerful anti-racist message and even opposed Nazis when they appeared at their shows. The struggle between fascists and anti-fascists have remained tied to the music even as the names and tactics have changed, especially as this conversation has moved to the mainstream over the past decade. Today we dive into the topic of anti-fascism. Our guest is Josh Fernandez, who wrote the memoir The Hands That Crafted the Bomb, The Making of a Lifelong Antifascist. Josh grew up in punk and opposed Nazis at shows in the late 80s and early 90s, and he continues to resist them in the street to this day. The Hands That Crafted the Bomb releases on February 13th, 2024 on PM Press. Also, my wife, Amy B., who is an editor and book coach, worked as an editor on this book. Her website is heyamyb.com.
When we scheduled this interview, I remember looking at it and going, wait, who's Josh Fernandez? And then you had to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were trying to do something a little bit different this episode. It's not just band person or performer talking about ska.
So you do know who Josh is now, though, right?
Well, yeah, we talked to him.
How much of his book did you read before the interview?
I was able to get through 3 chapters. I read a little bit slower than you do.
Okay. Are you still working on it?
Yeah, of course.
You know how many chapters I read?
The whole thing.
Whole thing. Yeah.
You're an overachiever.
I bear the burden of having to read the whole book. As the co-host, you could read 3 chapters.
Yeah, at least I made it through 3 chapters. The day of the episode, I was only 10 pages in.
So the first memory I have of you, I think the first time I became aware of you, we both live in Sacramento. And I think it was when you were doing the Satanic Temple. You were going to do a Satanic Temple chapter in Sacramento.
Yeah, right.
I was going to write an article on you, but I think that you were just doing too much. You didn't have the ability to make it happen.
Right. Yeah. There was a lot going on. And then afterward, after that one show we did, there were some really weird people who approached me and were like, yeah, Satan, bro. And like, they kind of freaked me out a little bit. they were like, but they like really wanted to worship Satan. And it was a weird scene. And then, the Satanic Temple main office or whatever it is, they never got back to me about starting the chapter. So it was just the whole thing was a mess, but it was really fun, that one show that we did.
Yeah, but the Satanic Temple, their whole thing is like not worshiping the devil. It's all about being antagonistic to our religious country. Would you say that would be a good way to summarize what the Satanic Temple is about?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really kind of satire, which I liked. And I think like a lot of the people at that show kind of understood that, but then a lot of people also were like the LaVeyan Satanists who were like more into
Yeah, people forget that Church of Satan and Satanic Temple are 2 different things.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of lost interest, to be honest.
And so you, again, we both live in Sacramento. You worked at the Sacramento News and Review for a while, and I worked there for a while too. But I think our times did not overlap because you were what were you like mid 2000?
Yeah, 2006 to 8, maybe. I worked there.
Okay. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. And when I worked, and then I freelanced for a little bit after that, I think. But
Now I've heard you talk a little bit in vague terms that you used to antagonize some of the people or piss a lot of people off in the local music scene.
yeah, I think I don't know. I read a lot of. I never went to journalism school or anything, or like, yeah, I never studied any journalism anything. I just read a lot of Big Brother magazines. I don't know if you've ever seen Big Brother magazine, but it's a skateboarding magazine. And they kind of like took over the skateboarding industry in the 90s and kind of like blew it up just by being so wacky. It was kind of the precursor to Jackass and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the Jackass people worked at Big Brother magazine. So it was kind of like the journalism version of Jackass, where they just write about the most ridiculous stuff. and just like none of the articles would have to do with anything that the article was supposed to be about. And like I just liked that. I thought it was fun, and it was like a really funny way to write stuff. And like I think that was just not okay for a lot of people in Sacramento. So I really just enjoyed writing. I didn't enjoy music journalism at all. I just wanted to write. So it was a bad career path for me.
And you remember any specific stories of people that were upset with you or articles you wrote that didn't land very well?
Oh man, there were so many. There was a band where they were having a show here in Sacramento, and I just remember like instead of like previewing the band, I just took a bunch of R. Kelly lyrics and plastered them on the page. So I just plagiarized R. Kelly. That was one. Another one was someone sent a hip hop CD, and I just corrected the spelling in the article because there were all these words that were spelled wrong. There was one guy who was hosting a show for Shepard Fairey. I think you know that artist Shepard Fairey.
Yeah.
And he sent this unhinged press release that was in all caps, and like all this stuff was it was just crazy. And I just like, instead of previewing the show, I just like made fun of his press release. And, like, and the guy went absolutely apeshit. He like called the office and was trying to fight me and stuff. It was really fun.
Now I have another memory. Something I feel like you posted this on Facebook or something where it was a well-known rapper that you did a phone interview with, and it was going good, and then you asked him about the homophobia in his lyrics, and he just hung up on you.
Yeah, that was Immortal Technique.
Oh, okay.
Immortal Technique. Yeah, and like, yeah, he was so pissed that I asked him that question, and like he hung up on me. And then I went to his show because it was like a preview for a show, and I was like, right before he came out on stage, I'm like, hey, I'm that journalist. He honestly gave me the worst death glare I've ever seen in my life.
You hit him with that right as he was about to get on stage?
Yeah, I did. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what, like, I would never do that now, but it's just something that I felt compelled to do. There was one article I did where I was supposed to interview Ghostface Killah from Wu-Tang Clan, and I was waiting for him to call, and he never called, and he just completely messed up my interview. So I wrote this article about how I hope his tour bus crashes into a ravine or something. And I went to the Ghostface show at Ace of Spades, and he got on stage and he like called me out. He's like, yo, where's that punk motherfucker Josh Fernandez? I'm like, oh no, bad. This is bad. But just stuff like that. It was super fun to me. I don't know what's wrong with me. Or I guess you read my book. You probably know what's wrong with me.
You don't seem to be afraid of confrontation.
It's just, maybe it's just there's something about, I'm not like a particularly brave person, but there's something exciting about confrontation that I've always been attracted to.
I want to bring up one more article. This was not for Sacramento News and View. This was for Submerge, which is another weekly in Sacramento. I guess it doesn't exist anymore, right?
Right.
So some years ago, you interviewed David Cho.
Yes.
And it's the craziest article. And I think you had said when you posted about it recently that you guys hated each other.
Yeah. Yeah. He hated me right off the bat.
So what happened? Did you guys just talk on the phone, or did you meet up?
I've been thinking about this ever since that article came out, and I think it's like we're basically the same person. Like we were both like so antagonistic, and like we just wanted to fuck with each other, and like, but we were like doing it in the same exact way, so it was frustrating for both of us. And like we were trying to one up each other, I think. Yeah, it was crazy. And then like one of my I was teaching a writing class at that time, And one of my students was like, the biggest Cho fan ever. And he's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're going to interview David Cho. So cool. This is so cool. And like, so I brought him up to David Cho. I'm like, do you have anything to say to the student? And he said something like horrible about the student. And then I told the student later, and the student was just so impressed. He was like so happy that David Cho just said this horrible thing about him.
Right, giving the fans what they want. One other weird memory I have. So we were both at this event at a Red Museum. It was like it was a wedding, and there was bands there.
Yeah.
And but you did a reading, and I just feel like you had a story. I could be wrong. It had to do with dropping acid and Sublime somehow. Am I fabricating that memory?
Maybe. I kind of don't remember. I was just listening to Sublime in the car though today.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and I always feel weird listening to Sublime because I know like I don't think you're supposed to listen to Sublime. I think that's a rule. But I love Sublime.
Hey, I allow you to listen to Sublime from now
Thank
on.
you. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Sublime has been so what happened with Sublime? Like people really don't.
I mean, it got co-opted by like frat jock culture.
Yeah, I guess that's it. I always forget about that.
And then some of the lyrical content like hasn't aged well.
Really? Okay. Yeah, probably not.
But I also think that aside from it getting adopted by frat bro culture, I think there was also a whole wave of like quote unquote like West Coast or whatever Cali reggae that's sort of seen as like
for sure.
having been inspired by Sublime. But I don't like fully subscribe to this because Sublime were not like a reggae band. They were a band that did like everything. And reggae was like one piece of that.
Yeah, that's true. I'm still gonna listen to Sublime. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, do you. In Defense of Ska will return in a moment.
This is the smell of the leftover tuna fish sandwich you left in your lunchbox over the weekend in a wimpy trash bag.
Wimpy, wimpy, wimpy!
Blech! And this is the smell of that same sandwich in a hefty, ultra-strong trash bag.
Hefty, hefty, hefty!
Ah, smell the difference? Hefty Ultra Strong has Arm & Hammer with continuous odor control, so no matter what's inside your trash, you can stay one step ahead of stinky. And for bigger jobs, try the superior strength of Hefty Large Black Bags.
All right, so back in the day, you saw Operation Ivy live.
Yeah. At least once. I think maybe twice or maybe 3 times. But back in those days, we would every weekend there was a show, and we didn't even read the flyers. Like we'd just go to the show. It was just every weekend punk show, and like whatever bands came, we'd just go nuts. And like a lot of those bands were like Operation Ivy, and then Sweet Children, which became Green Day, Rancid, all that stuff. And they were just bands. Like I don't even think we knew what was happening, but we would just see all those bands. So yeah, there were just so many shows of so many good bands.
What were the places you were going to see these shows?
We were in Davis, so it was like the Davis Teen Center, the Veterans Memorial Hall. Those were the 2 main places. There was in Davis. So there was there was another place over there in Davis. I think there were 3 venues that kind of like switched out shows, but it was mostly those places.
Do you remember anything about Operation Ivy? Like thinking back to any of those shows?
I don't think so. It all blends in together. In fact, in my book, I wrote about this show that I went to at the community park. That's another place they had shows. And I originally wrote that scene with Operation Ivy playing that show where we got beat up by skinheads. And then I did this like triangulation where I'm like trying to figure out if that was actually the band playing, and it ended up being Green Day.
Were you at that show the Green Day show that got where Nazis showed up?
No, that was in Sacramento. That was, I wasn't at that show.
Oh, okay. This is a different Green Day show.
Different Green Day show. Yeah. Yeah. Back in those days, it was just like, there were Nazi skinheads everywhere. They were at every show, basically. And like, nobody knew what to do with them. So that was the dilemma. We were like, going to shows was scary. It was like really fun, but it was also really scary and like really nerve-wracking to be at those shows because the possibility of violence was so high.
Yeah.
What time period are you talking about when you say that this problem was like out of control?
It was around 1989, 1990.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's when like, so I was, when I was 15, I think was like prime going to shows and then, circling around the pit with neo-Nazis and getting beaten up by neo-Nazis.
So these neo-Nazis, like, do you know who they were? Were they around town outside of shows, or did they just sort of manifest when it was time for a punk show?
They were like looking back, it would look so weird because they were kids like us. They were a little older, but they went to schools. Like I'd see them sometimes. Yeah, they'd be around. Everyone knew who they were. I don't know why they gravitated toward that part of the scene, but yeah, they were just other kids. They were other lost kids, but they just, whatever it was, they just gravitated towards something different. But yeah, they were around. We'd see them all the time.
It's got to be a weird thing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird, but it was like, it was funny because during that time, I made this big poster of like a swastika crossed out, and I put it on my wall in my room. And my mom came in, and she was like horrified. She's like, "There's no Nazis anymore." And I'm like, "What? They're fucking everywhere." It's like, it just probably looks weird to someone who's not in that scene to like even think about Nazis, but that's what I was doing all the time. I was going to these shows and getting beaten up by Nazis. So like, they were everywhere. In my little world.
Can you remember being a kid before going to shows, or maybe like when you started going to shows, and what was your knowledge of Nazis before that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't really know anything. Like when I grew up in Boston, I mostly listened to rap and was really into that. And then as I was leaving around when I was 13, some of my friends started getting into punk, and the Boston hardcore scene was just rough. Anyway, it was a rough scene, and I knew that. But I didn't know much about Nazis until I started going to shows in Davis. And in Davis, one of the first Nazis I ever saw was a dude who was like half black.
Weird.
His name was Paco, and he was like a full-on Nazi. We were like, what? What does this even mean? But he was hardcore. He was violent and hardcore.
So, I mean, pretty early on, you get into resisting and anti-racist action. Was there an incident that kind of brought you to that?
I think all of us were sick of getting beat up. I was a little kid. Like I was a little kid. I mean, we were all little kids, but I was like physically small, and most of us were physically small, and we didn't stand a chance. Like we were not trained in fighting. We didn't know how to fight. We were all scared, and so I think that was the impetus for us to start like organizing. And it wasn't until an older kid, Aragorn, organized us all together. He was the one. He would have been a good cult leader because he was like, he was very like charismatic and everyone loved him, and he was like a loudmouth. And he had this way of just like gathering people together. So like he helped us become straight edge kids. We didn't know anything about straight edge until Aragorn. He helped us organize into the first Sacramento anti-racist action group, where we would, get together and go to shows together and make sure that Nazis didn't come into the venues that we were at.
So before this group, like you'd go to shows and Nazis would show up. And so like how would you describe like what would happen? Would they just start picking on kids and beating them up just kind of randomly?
Yeah. Yeah, they'd take your hat. They'd come for me a lot because I was small and like I don't know. I've just always had this energy where people like gravitate toward me, but like sometimes in a positive way, but also in a negative way as well. So I'm always singled out. But yeah, they'd like take my hat and then they'd, push me around. They'd get me in the pit and find me and start punching me. And like our little crew of hardcore kids, we were all different colors, like Puerto Rican, Black, Mexican, all kinds of shit. So like they really had a field day with our little group of friends.
So what is anti-racist action or what does this resistance look like at this point? You guys get together with Aragorn and what is sort of your plan to keep them out of shows?
It's basically to never leave each other's side. It's basically like we're gonna go in as a group. We're gonna hide weapons in the bushes outside. And if anyone sees one of these boneheads show up, we're all gonna go out and beat them with weapons.
What type of weapons?
Sticks, bats, hammers.
Just straight up like, yeah,
Just anything.
West Side Story type shit.
Totally, yeah. Like it wasn't super organized, but it was really like it was really effective because there were a lot of us. And it's like, kids alone are not scary, but like, 12 kids with sticks is
Hell
like
yeah.
fucking Children of the Corn.
It's like, Lord of the Flies shit.
Yeah, it really is. So it's like it worked and like it got really bad and it got it was really scary and but it worked. They stopped coming to shows for the most part.
Was there a particular interaction that got violent or scary enough that they got their asses kicked enough, I guess, that they were like, nope, no more?
Not really. I mean, not really. It was really gradual and kind of like, they'd still show up at bigger shows that were like at the Crest or something or I don't know. They'd be around, but it was different. Once they realized that there were a bunch of kids with sticks and weapons, they like really thought twice about where they were going to show up, especially these little hardcore shows. But it was really that incident at the Cattle Club where there were a bunch of stabbings and Aragorn got stabbed and his roommate got stabbed to death. That's when everything kind of just broke. It was really just, and once someone dies, it's like a different story, and it's like it's really serious. And I think those boneheads, even though they're boneheads, they still had hearts and they still had minds. So like they didn't want to mess around with like murders,
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what show that was?
I don't remember. I don't know.
And Cattle Club's what became Bojangles, right?
Yeah, right.
Now, Nazis, obviously, there's an ideology that's violent attached to their being Nazis. But was it inherent that if they were there, they would cause violence, or was it not necessarily they were always violent?
Yeah, not necessarily. And like I went back to Boston a bunch of times to visit and go to shows and stuff, and like there were always boneheads there, and like a lot of the times they would just go to shows, and it wasn't always violence, but I think because of their ideology, they felt the need to like support it and it was almost like a reflex for them to sieg heil at a show. Like it's like they couldn't,
Like instead of applauding.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just like they were really moved by the music, so they sieg
Fuck.
heil. So yeah, I think they just did that, especially, if they were in a group and they felt a little more secure, they were bound to do that stuff. But yeah, every now and then you'd see them and they wouldn't be doing anything.
Which your policy was, you're not allowed here, period, basically.
Yeah. We would just try to push them out no matter what.
I know like Gilman kind of struggled with this a bit in its early years. Like, what did we do about the Nazis? Some people were like, we're not we're nonviolence, we're passive, or we're pacifist, and there was some discussion about that. And other people were like, well, if they're not wearing their stuff or if they turn their shirt inside out, that's fine. But other people were like, no, they can't be here at all. And I think there was a confrontation at Gilman that basically turned into a big fight, and that got them out of there. But this idea of being pacifist with Nazis doesn't really work.
Right.
I mean, I think that's probably a big part of like what you've kind of dealt with your whole life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I like the idea of nonviolence. I really do. And I don't like the idea of violence at all. But it's been so in your face, and like I understand how these people work, and I understand their motivations, and I understand their end game. And I understand how they operate in spaces that are supposed to be like safe for people to enjoy music, and it's so dangerous, and it's so vile. And like I was at a show, I think it was maybe last year, at Ace of Spades, and like there was a bonehead there, and he sieg heiled, and in about 10 seconds there are about 20 people beating his ass. And I was so proud of that. I was like, yes, this is exactly what you have to do. It's like, it's so not glamorous, and it's so not pretty, and it's like such a horrible thing to have to do, but like it's just kind of what needs to happen. It's like people should not be able to like go out and be safe doing that shit.
So when you say you understand their motivation and end game and the what they do in spaces, could you extrapolate on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, their whole thing is recruitment. Their whole thing is recruitment,
Mm.
and they're trying to like just everything about the way they steal the skinhead style because it's cool. The way they dress, their boots, the braces, like the way they stole all that from a legitimate subculture and tried to co-opt it into this racist thing is like it's all about recruiting more members, and it's about ethnic cleansing, and it's about like the white race, and it's about um, extermination of people who don't look like them. So yeah, it's just all bad. It's all bad. That's their end game. And like, even if they're at a show not doing anything, they're still actively recruiting, and that just can't happen.
A lot of this like white supremacy, these groups and Nazis and stuff, like I think people like think that there's a lot of that it's focused on like their superiority, but a lot of it's focused on this idea that white people are being rooted out of society or something. It's like this false idea that they're fighting back against. Would you say that's correct? That's kind of what drives us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I just went to not just, but it was a while ago. I went to one of their rallies at the Capitol, and it was like all about white genocide,
Yeah.
how like white people are being genocided out of existence. And so yeah, they truly believe that there's going to be no more white people left, and that's kind of what's driving them. So yeah, it's all ridiculous. It's all ridiculous, and like it makes no sense. And when I teach in the prison, now, and when I go into the prison, I teach a lot of like either active white supremacists or ex white supremacists, and they tell me all this shit. Like they know. It's funny because they really respect me as a human, and so like they tell me that their ideology doesn't make sense.
That's so weird.
I know, it's so weird, and like especially the active ones. Like I can see the X ones, but even the active ones, they're full of contradictions. They don't like. I taught this one white supremacist this semester who's like his whole religion is white supremacist. But he listens to only rap music, and he's like a slam poet. And I'm like, one, that has to be like honestly the worst slam poetry ever. Two, like I don't understand. Like, how can you listen to Tupac in your headphones on the way to class and sit down in my classroom with Tupac blasting in your headphones and then write an essay about the Asatru religion, like some pagan bullshit thing? It's mind blowing. I don't understand.
It's weird. For my book, I interviewed the founder of Sharp, Marcus. I can't remember his last name,
Uh-huh.
Pacheco,
Yeah.
and part of his mission was to explain that skinhead culture was not racist culture and to kind of explain the history of it.
Uh-huh.
And there was a quote where he said something like, "Oh, I want these boneheads to know, where this stuff comes from and this music comes from, and if they understood that this was Jamaican music and all this and that, maybe they might rethink this." And I appreciate what he's saying, but I also kind of think that they don't care because none of it makes sense, like you're saying.
Right. There's no line of logic that you could present them where they'd be like, yeah, you're right. Because it's not a logical ideology. It's based upon hate. And so like I tell my students this all the time. I'm like, you can write about anything you want. You just can't base your argument in hate. That's my only rule. And so like we end up talking about that a lot, about hate-based arguments. But yeah, it's still it kind of escapes them.
So you're very actively involved in anti-racist activities and events and stuff now in the present day.
Yes.
Now I'm curious, as a person who was a part of this back in the late 80s and who's a part of it now, is it similar? Is it different? Like what do you see as the thread of these sort of two time periods?
Um, it's actually not that similar, to be honest.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people. I think when Trump came into office, I think a lot of people turned toward anti-fascism as an ideology, and they didn't really understand what it was. I'm trying to word this delicately. There a lot of there that rhetoric that came out a lot that was like punch a Nazi.
Mhm.
I heard that so many times from people who have obviously never punched anyone,
Mm-hmm.
and like they'd kind of just flaunt that as their ideology rather than like a seriously well thought out anti-racist ideology. It was kind of just like punch a Nazi, and like that was it. You'd go on the internet, lay that down, and then go back home, and your anti-racist work is done.
Mhm.
And so it was a lot of that. So I think the internet changed a lot of things. People in the 80s and 90s were just, I think they were tough. And then there was a lot of physical confrontation that happened. Um, and the internet didn't exist.
Yeah.
And, it was just it was a lot different. So I think the internet has really sort of done weird things to our culture and to people, and it's made people say a lot of things that I think they don't understand or don't mean and don't really need to back up. But I think the core is still there. I think people want to be anti-racist, and they want to have a movement that they can call their own, and they want to organize. So I think that's the same.
What about from the Nazi side? Are these groups, what do you feel like is similar or different from these groups today as they were, 20, 30 years ago?
The ones today are trying to legitimize themselves. They're really trying to find ways into the political conversation. They're mainstream. They're in the mainstream. We had people in office and they're joining school boards, and they're being vocal in the local community. So they're really trying to give themselves a bigger platform through more quote unquote legitimate forms of legitimate outlets like school boards or city councils or things like that. We have here we have White Lives Matter. We have Patriot Front. We have all these little groups that are kind of clean cut. We have active clubs, which are focused on mixed martial arts and fitness and sports and clean living and things like that. So they're really trying to branch out and trying to legitimize themselves. Whereas those 80s skinheads were just 80s skinheads. You could spot them from a mile away.
They didn't, conservative America wanted nothing to do with them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was they were just completely on the outskirts. They were on the fringes.
Yeah. And now conservative America, right-wing America is in bed with this movement.
Yeah. Although they won't admit it. That's the thing is we have all these code words now. We have all these these ways of shielding from taking responsibility, right? We have it's easy to distance yourself if you're not quite being honest about who you are. So a lot of these racist groups will kind of do it through subtle language or code words, or we know what they're saying, but still it's how people like Nick Fuentes can actually go and get airtime, or people like Richard Spencer are now back in the conversation. So yeah, it's really slimy, and it's pretty obvious without being obvious.
I mean, how much of this would you pin on Trump becoming a serious candidate and then president? Not the existence of these people, but this movement towards, okay, let's become a mainstream movement now.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely ushered it along. It's hard to pin something on one guy, but his whole movement definitely brought people out of the woodwork. People felt way more comfortable. After he became president, I started getting death threats under my door in my office at school, at the school where I teach. I'd get white supremacist cartoons on my door, all kinds of stuff. And so there definitely was a correlation. People really felt empowered by this man. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a system that's enabling racist ideologies to breed and exist, but yeah, a figurehead can do damage.
We'll be right back after this.
So I want to ask you a question that your school board asked you, but I'm asking it out of actual legitimate curiosity. Can you define Antifa and its purpose?
Sure. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what I actually told the investigator.
I have it written down somewhere, but yeah, let's release it off the cuff. Yeah.
I mean, really, it's just anti-fascism. That's it. It's against an ideology that legitimizes extreme nationalism, extreme capitalism, bigotry, and xenophobia.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ideology that goes against that stuff, and that's it. And it's really an ideology. And so, like, it's funny. I went camping with my old friends from a long time ago this summer, and one of them is a reporter for the where is he a reporter for? New York Times. He pulls me aside. He's like, "Wait, so like Antifa actually exists, right?" Because it's funny. It's funny because I've been involved with anti-fascist work for so long that like I forget that it has a stigma and there's like all this controversy surrounding it. So like I think there's a big misconception about like what it is and like how people are like, oh, there's no such thing as Antifa. There's it's only an ideology. And so like of course there's groups of people who consider themselves Antifa. Of course it exists. There's no leader. There's no there's no office. There's no one funding anything. It's just it's just a bunch of different people. There's grandmas, there's teachers, there's business people, there's politicians, there's all kinds of people. So it's really not one big group. It's just individual people who believe a thing.
So there's a fear of Antifa, not just on the right, but I would say within independent, maybe even some liberal circles. Do you feel like the fear of Antifa is tied to people not wanting to fully accept the very thing that Antifa is opposing?
I think it's pretty complex, to be honest. I think the media does a really good job of catching the bad moments of everything, right? And so like every news article I've ever seen says Antifa in the headline, and then people in black bloc like lighting some shit on fire. So like that's what's being fed to everyone. And it's like constant, and it's like that's why people I don't know if you remember, there was all those fires in Paradise, and
Mm-hmm.
and like there were groups of citizens like stopping cars, making sure Antifa wasn't coming to like capitalize on the fires and set more fires and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like if you think about what it's like to be in one of those towns where like that's what you're seeing on Fox News is like these people dressed in black like lighting shit on fire, and then your town's on fire. Like, yeah, I could kind of see that. I'm like, yeah, I might be worried too, but